ESPN has a masculinity crisis, and Pat McAfee fills that void. His association with the WWE, his association with College Game Day, and his loose association with the UFC. He has branded himself as the manliest man at ESPN.
If Pat McAfee is the only representation of masculinity at the worldwide leader in woke, then ESPN could soon be facing a masculinity crisis. According to a report that was released yesterday morning, Pat McAfee is being heavily recruited by Netflix, and he could be leaving ESPN within the next 12, 14 months. Now, initially, I was skeptical of Pat McAfee leaving ESPN for Netflix, but then last night, I saw a report that was released by John Orand, who I consider to be a reliable source. Headline at Puck News: Cut down day is coming at ESPN. Translation: people are about to get fired. Woke welfare is about to expire. For some, their woke welfare has already expired. A couple of weeks ago, ESPN announced that they were firing Clinton Yates. It was the first time that most people had even heard the name Clinton Yates. My inside sources are telling me that family and friends of Clinton Yates, they were surprised that he had a job to lose. They had no idea that he had spent the last few years polluting the airways with toxic mouth farts on ESPN radio. Judging by his ratings, neither did anyone else. In the last 10 years, ESPN has eliminated almost 1,000 jobs. 2015, ESPN went through its first major layoff where 300 people lost their jobs. Unfortunately, many of those hardworking people, they were replaced with diversity deputies. They were replaced with talentless woke welfare collectors like Sarah Spain, or the originator of the term huge embarrassing failure, Bomani Jones. ESPN's dedication to diversity, it led to years of their ratings being in the pooper. 2017, another 100 people were fired by the worldwide leader in woke. High-profile journalists or reporters like Ed Werder, Danny Cannell, real NFL analysts, keyword, real. We're not talking about pretend analysts like Monica McDougal. Real NFL analysts like Trent Dilfer lost their jobs. 2020, another 300 jobs were eliminated and 200 positions were just left unfilled. ESPN has cut so many jobs, they no longer have beat reporters dedicated to each team in the NBA. Last month, ESPN was publicly humiliated when Dane Moore, an independent podcaster who covers the Minnesota Timberwolves, Dane Moore, he refused to allow ESPN to use an exclusive soundbite between he and Anthony Edwards that he captured in the locker room after a game. Dane Moore basically told ESPN, hire your own beat reporters. I can understand ESPN not having individual beat reporters for each team in the WNBA dump. Hell, I can understand ESPN not having a single reporter covering the entire dump. But the NBA? The league that is literally keeping ESPN alive. You don't have individual reporters covering every team in that league? 3 years ago, ESPN went through their most high-profile round of layoffs. They fired Jeff Van Gundy and Mark Jackson, which was 2/3 of the only broadcast trio at the network who actually knew how to call NBA games properly. Steve Young, Jalen Rose, the former lead pastor at Woke United Methodist, Max Kellerman, Susie Kolber. ESPN saved millions of dollars by firing approximately 20 of their on-air personalities. Here we are 3 years later, with ESPN eliminating another 30 jobs. Now, according to John Oran, most of the positions being eliminated this time are going to be off camera. But the question is why? How did we get here? Why is the most powerful sports network in the country constantly eliminating jobs, constantly going through layoffs? Maybe, just maybe, it has to do with the fact that ESPN lost $100 million last year. Make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at KC_BTL84. Wanted to give you guys a quick reminder. I'm going to be leaving Friday and will be out of the country until the 18th. I'll be doing one video on Friday, and after that, I will not see you guys until the 19th. Entire family's going on vacation. I'm going to do my best to unplug for a week and enjoy it. It's not going to be easy. I hate not being here, but when you don't see me next week, that's why. Nothing bad happened, and I will damn sure be back. Last year during football season, ESPN and YouTube, they were fighting over broadcast fees. It is no coincidence that the network scheduled these contracts to expire during football season. ESPN, they don't want their broadcast rights contracts with cable and satellite providers to expire in July and August. No one, and I mean no one, is going to be pissed off if they lose access to pretend basketball games in the WNBA. But when Remus in Tuscaloosa can't watch his Alabama football, when Susie in Athens can't watch her Georgia Bulldogs, it causes widespread backlash, and it puts pressure on cable and satellite providers to make a deal with ESPN. Historically, it put pressure on cable and satellite providers to overpay for ESPN. You see, in the past, ESPN had all the leverage. If they were fighting with Dish Network, if Dish refused to acquiesce to ESPN's unreasonable demands, they risked losing thousands of customers to DirecTV or Comcast or whatever doofus cable provider you have in your area. For decades, ESPN was allowed to charge exorbitant rates for their family of networks. ESPN was by far the most expensive network on cable. What ended up happening, people who never watched ESPN, they were the ones paying most of the bill. ESPN was being artificially supported financially by people who had no interest in watching sports. Women, dudes who don't watch sports, or as they prefer to be called, transgender women. All kidding aside, ESPN was being supported by people who had no interest in watching their network. They had all the leverage in negotiations with cable and satellite providers. But with YouTube, it was different. For the first time, ESPN was going into negotiations with no leverage. YouTube is owned by Google, which is owned by Alphabet Inc. Now, Uncle KC has a very loving relationship with Alphabet Inc. because they send me nice paychecks every month. For Google, YouTube TV is a microscopic portion of their multi-trillion-dollar business, which means they do not need ESPN to survive. Those 2 weeks when ESPN and YouTube were fighting over broadcast fees, fighting over money, for YouTube, it was the equivalent of a flea on an elephant's ass. For ESPN, losing the millions of subscribers on YouTube TV, it was catastrophic. As a result, ESPN was basically forced into a deal with YouTube where they lost $100 million in revenue. 6 months later, ESPN is going through another round of layoffs. To be honest with you, I think this could be just the beginning. In the last decade, ESPN has lost 40 million subscribers on cable and satellite, with each subscriber paying approximately $10 a month. You're talking about $400 million in lost revenue every month. I don't understand how some of these salaries at ESPN are sustainable long term. Stephen A. Smith, for example, he's making $20 million a year, which great for Stephen A. Smith. Happy for him. But when you look at his ratings, I don't see how that salary is sustainable. He hosts a morning show that averages around 400,000 viewers. But I'm number one, damn it! I'm important. I drive a Dodge Stratus! Yeah, you're number one because you're the only one. Which leads me to Pat McAfee. There were multiple reports yesterday circulating on sites dedicated to covering the orchestrated combat in the WWE. So, I don't know how accurate these reports are. I mean, these are people who cover fake wrestling and present it like it actually matters. They live in a world of make-believe, so this could just be a nicely polished turd, a rumor. But if you look at the career of Pat McAfee, he doesn't normally stay in one place for very long. Started his career at Barstool, left in under 2 years. Moved the show to DAZN. 1 year later, he was at SiriusXM. He worked at Fox Sports. 3 years ago, he started with ESPN. Judging by his history, if Pat McAfee was looking to make a move, the time would be now. According to these reports, Netflix is interested in making Pat McAfee kind of like the face of their sports division. But Uncle Casey, I thought L. Duncan was the face of Netflix sports division. Yeah. Recently, Netflix has been acquiring the rights to video podcast and streaming the shows on their platform. Bill Simmons, I think they've got some of the dudes from Barstool Sports. Obviously, Pat McAfee would be the biggest name that they've landed. And unlike ESPN, who pays Pat McAfee around $17 million a year, Netflix can afford to pay him significantly more. Even though Pat McAfee doesn't draw on linear television, he is a major draw for ESPN digitally. You can make the case that Pat McAfee is the biggest star at the network, and there is no denying the fact that Pat McAfee has changed ESPN. When he arrived 3 years ago, the network was featuring diversity deputies and woke wanker spankers. Today, ESPN is distancing themselves from woke United Methodist. The problem is, if they lose Pat McAfee, who does ESPN have to replace him? Clinton Yates is easily replaceable. You could program AI to replace Clinton Yates, and it would probably draw better ratings. Pat McAfee cannot be replaced. And if you look at the past 10 years, ESPN has a proven track record of having the inability to create new stars. Outside of Stephen A. Smith, name one star that ESPN has created in the last 10 years. Sound off in the comments below. I'll see you guys later.